I was not a diplomat. I want that understood before anything else, because in the years since, the accounts have made me into one, and it flatters nobody. I was a surveyor. I measured things and I wrote down what I measured and I filed it where it belonged, and for 40 years that was the whole of my profession and the whole of my ambition. On the morning of the audit, I sat at the recording desk 8 feet behind the delegation, with a lap board across my knees and 2 pencils, because the hall of the register did not permit powered instruments and had not permitted them for 900 years. The hall was on Talvisane, and it was the most beautiful room I have ever been inside, and I say that as a man who has stood on the ice bridges of Kell and watched a sun rise through them. It was long rather than round, 240 meters of white floor stone, worn into gentle troughs along the walking lines by 9 centuries of feet that were not human feet. Above the floor rose 9 tiers of drawers, brass fronts, each one the width of 2 hands, each with a small glass tag and a card behind the glass, and behind the card a world. 411,000 drawers. Ladders on brass rails ran the length of every tier, and the registrars went up and down them all day like patient birds, and the sound of a drawer closing was the sound that room made instead of silence. Over all of it lay a barrel vault of clear leaded glass, 300 panes to a bay, and through it that morning came the flat white daylight of a world with no weather worth the name. Talvisane has thin air and a high hard sky. The light in the hall of the register never wavers. It falls on the drawers and it falls on the floor and it does not flatter anyone. There were ships in that sky, not ours. The Commission had ordered its honor squadron into standing formation above the Capitol for the duration of the audit, 11 cruisers hanging in the pale blue like beads on a wire, one for each commissioner, and you could see them through the glass if you tipped your head back. Ceremonial. A courtesy to the seated body. I mention them because in every telling of this that I have read since, somebody puts a human fleet in that sky, and there was no human fleet in that sky. There was nothing of ours above Talvisane that day, but whether that did not exist. We had come by liner. We had come with 2 trunks of paper and a hand trolley, and the trolley had been inspected at the hall's east door by a clerk who turned each of the cards in it over, one at a time, for an hour and 11 minutes, and stamped the trolley's manifest and let it through. I have thought about that clerk more than I have thought about the commissioners. The delegation of Earth was 4 people. Envoy Marta Ilves, who was 58 and had been a customs adjudicator before she was anything else. Her deputy, Saifa Oyalaran, who did not speak once in the entire proceeding and was not required to. Tomas Led, 26, our junior clerk, whose whole function that week was to push a trolley. And me at the desk behind them with my 2 pencils, because somebody had to keep the human record, and because I was the man who had built the thing in the trolley. Across the floor from us, on a bench of black wood raised 4 steps, sat the 9th Standing Commission on Accession and Survey. I should describe them, because it matters what they were, and because the accounts describe them wrongly too. The Areskai are tall, and they do not stand the way we stand. From the crown of the skull down over the shoulders and halfway to the elbow, they carry a mantle of jade-colored plate, segmented, slightly translucent at the edges where the light comes through it, like the rim of a shell held up to a lamp. The mantle lies flat when they are at ease. When they are troubled it lifts, a fraction, and the plates click against one another. And once you have heard a room of 900 Areskai make that noise at the same moment, you do not need a translation of anything, ever again. They have no mouth that you can see. Speech is made in the chest and passes out through a resonator collar of hammered silver worn at the throat, and every Areskai wears one, and no 2 collars sound alike, and a wealthy collar is a beautiful instrument. Above the brow ridge they have 4 eyes in a row, black and wet, and they do not blink together. To lower the mantle deliberately is assent. To hold it lifted is objection. The whole parliamentary procedure of the Concord of Talves rests on the reading of shoulders, and a great deal of misunderstanding across 9 centuries has come from other species who cannot lower a mantle they do not have. 11 of them sat on the bench. In the tiers behind and above them, in the 2 long galleries that ran the length of the hall under the drawers, sat the delegates of the member states, and they were not all Eresci. The Audited were there, gray and long-limbed and folded into their seats like carpenter's rules. The Vhem sat in their scholarly rows with 2 of their 4 hands occupied in writing and 2 folded, as their courtesy requires. There were 40-odd other species whose names I set down in my record that morning and will not set down again, because the point of them is that there were many, and there were 4 of us, and the arithmetic of the room was the whole argument of the room. 806 member states, 1 human seat. The presiding officer was the chairholder Asin, who had held the hall for 31 years and whose collar was very old and very plain. To her right sat Commissioner Drawn of the Survey Standard, whose collar was not plain at all, and who had brought the audit, and who had wanted it for a decade. And at the foot of the bench, at a small desk of her own, with her back to nobody and her face to the drawers, sat the tallier of the register, whose name was Hesk, and who was 94 years old, and who wore the tally cord of her office knotted once for every year she had served. 91 knots. I counted them during the reading. It gave me something to do with my eyes. The proceeding opened, as everything in that hall opened, with the instrument. 2 registrars carried it in. It is not a book. It is a folio of 11 leaves, bound between boards of some pale wood, and it is 903 years old, and it is read aloud in full at the opening of any sitting that touches the register itself. It took 2 hours and 40 minutes. Nobody moved. Led, 26 years old and standing at parade rest behind his trolley, did not shift his weight once, and I was proud of him in a way I did not have language for. I had read the instrument perhaps 400 times in my career. I could have recited the 2 articles that mattered in my sleep, and in a certain period of my life I did. Article 9. Of unfitness and non-account. Any body surveyed under the common standard and found unfit shall be entered as unfit, and shall thereafter be of no account. It shall not be registered, nor claimed, nor granted, nor taxed, nor defended, nor counted in the census of any state. It shall pass to no one, being nothing. Article 12. Of conclusiveness. The register is the truth of the conquered. What the register says of a body, that body is, in every court, in every treaty, in every border, and in every reckoning, now and hereafter, and no other proof shall be admitted against it. 900 years, those 2 articles had sat next to each other. They were the reason the conquered had never had a border war worth the name. Every boundary in 806 member states was measured as a distance from registered space. Every trade lane, every tithe, every seat, every census, every right of transit, every claim of any kind that any species had made since the founding, all of it derived from what the drawers said. The drawers said it, therefore it was so. The elegance of it is real. I do not sneer at it. It is one of the finest instruments of law any species has ever made, and it worked, and it held peace across a volume of space that human beings had not yet learned to properly imagine when it was written. It has one flaw. It is not a flaw of drafting. It is a flaw of temperament. The standard by which a world is found fit or unfit was written by the Eresci, for the Eresci, in the 9th century of their expansion, and then extended by courtesy to the founding species who joined them, all of whom were near enough in their requirements that the standard did not have to bend. A fit world lies within a narrow band. Surface gravity between 8/10 and 1 1/10 of standard. Stellar radiation flux within a listed range. No permanent ice sheet exceeding a stated fraction of the surface. No tectonic activity above a stated index. Atmospheric pressure between stated bounds. Ultraviolet at the surface below a stated figure. Tidal locking disqualifies. Axial tilt beyond 11 degrees disqualifies. And so on, for 260 clauses, each of them reasonable, each of them written by a people whose bodies had certain requirements, and who had never once had cause to doubt that requirements were requirements. Everything else is unfit. Everything else is of no account. Everything else is nothing. The conquered surveyors have been diligent for 900 years. They have gone out and they have measured and they have come back and they have filed. That is the extraordinary thing, the thing that nobody outside the hall ever understands about the register. It is not a list of the conquered's worlds. It is a list of every world, fit and unfit both. The unfit ones are catalogued as scrupulously as the fit ones, given a number, given a card, given a drawer, and then stamped in the corner with a small black glyph that means of no account and closed, and never thought about again by anybody except the registrar who dusts the tier. 411,000 drawers, 9,200 of them registered worlds. The rest is the other thing. Humanity had acceded to the conquered 141 years before that morning. Our accession had been unremarkable. We were surveyed. 9 of our bodies passed the standard, Earth among them, and were registered. And on the strength of 9 registered worlds we were given 1 seat in the assembly, a modest tariff schedule, and the right to petition. It was, by the arithmetic of the room, an entirely fair settlement. And I want to be honest that I have never met a human being who could argue otherwise on the law. For 141 years the conquered asked us the same question, at every decennial review, in the same words, because the words are in the instrument and cannot be varied. State the worlds of your registration. And for 141 years we answered it. 9. We answered it in the 4th year of accession, and in the 14th, and in the 51st, and in the 93rd, and in the 138th. And every time we answered it truthfully, and every time the answer went into the drawer, and every time the commission of that generation lowered its mantle and moved to the next business. 9, it was always 9. It was true every time. The audit had come out of a small thing, as these things do. 12 years earlier, the human delegation had petitioned for a second seat, on the grounds of population. Seats are apportioned by census. Census is derived from the register. The register said 9 worlds. The petition was refused correctly in 9 minutes, and would have died there, except that Commissioner Drawn had risen to speak against it, and had gone 1 sentence further than the refusal required. He said that the human petition was not an error but a habit. He said that a species which had been given 9 worlds and 1 seat, and a tariff schedule had spent a century behaving in the assembly as though it possessed more than it did, in its tone, in its shipping, in its unhurriedness, and that the conquered had indulged this because it was amusing to indulge. He said that the accounts of human shipping did not reconcile with 9 worlds. And he moved, then and there, for a full audit of human holdings under the residual power of the Commission, so that the register could be compared against the truth, and the human seat, if it was dishonestly held, could be struck. He believed we were lying. That is the thing I have never been able to make anyone understand. He did not think we were dangerous. He thought we were a species of small liars who had been overstating themselves at the edge of a great body's attention for 100 years, and he intended to open the drawer and hold the card up to the light and show the assembly the discrepancy and be done with us. The motion took 12 years to reach the floor, because everything in that hall takes 12 years. And on the morning I am describing, the instrument having been read, Chairholder Ossing lowered her mantle to Commissioner Drawn and gave him the floor, and he rose, and he read the question of the audit into the record. I have the words. I wrote them down as he spoke them in pencil on the lapboard, and I have the sheet still. The Commission requires the delegation of Earth to declare, entire and without reservation, every world, moon, station, and body which the human species inhabits, holds, works, or defends, that the Commission may compare the said declaration against the register, and determine whether the human seat is honestly held. There it was. I want to be very careful here, because this is the place where the story is always told wrong, and it is always told wrong in our favor, which is worse. Nobody had ever asked us that before, not in 141 years. It is not a question the instrument contains. The instrument asks for the worlds of your registration because for 900 years there has been no daylight between what a species is registered for and what a species holds, because no species had ever gone and lived somewhere the standard said was nothing. Why would they? The standard is not a prohibition. It is a description. It says, this place will kill you. And it does. Kel will kill you. The ice bridges I mentioned are 700 meters of pressure ice over a liquid ocean, and the first 4 survey teams we put down on Kel went through, and we still lift a hand to the flags on the shelf when we pass them. Adair will kill you, at 1 4/10 gravities, and it has killed a great many of us. And it is where we build our ships now because a hull rolled under that gravity does not need to be argued with afterward. Marrow will kill you. Its ultraviolet flux is 9 times the standard ceiling, and we live under 3 meters of regolith and glass, and we grow wheat in the dark, and my brother is buried there. Senate is tidally locked, and we live on the ring of dusk. Pallas has a tectonic index the standard cannot express, and we live on the water. Rhone's tilt is 41 degrees, and it has 2 winters, and we lose people every one of them. 2,041 of them. None of it was hidden. This is the part that costs me. There was no secret. There was no long human plan, no clever silence, no century-deep deception maintained by disciplined generations. There was only 141 years of a species answering, with complete honesty, the exact question it was asked, and going home, and going out again to the places nobody wanted, because the places nobody wanted were the only places on offer, and because we had come up out of a gravity well that had also been trying to kill us for 400,000 years, and we did not find the proposition novel. We did not take anything. Not one world in the 2041 was registered. Not one belonged to anybody. Each of them had been surveyed by the conquered, most of them centuries before we ever saw a conquered ship, and found unfit and stamped of no account and closed in a drawer. Article 9. It shall pass to no one being nothing. We had gone and lived in the conquered's nothing. And I had spent 40 years of my life making the concordance. That was my work. It is the whole of what I did, and I did it because in my 21st year, as a junior surveyor on the second Marrow landing, I had pulled a Concord catalog tag off a beacon that had been sitting on that scorched hill for 600 years, and I had looked at the number on it, and I had gone back and found the drawer, and there was Marrow. Card, number, survey date, 4 columns of measurement in a registrar's beautiful hand, and the little black glyph in the corner. Of no account. Everything we lived on was in those drawers. All of it. Every single world. Somebody, some Ireskai surveyor in a cold ship 400 or 700 or 900 years ago, had gone there first and measured it, and written it down honestly and filed it and stamped it nothing. So I made the list. 2,041 human-held bodies, each with its human name, its coordinates, its date of first landing, its present population, and, in the 4th column, the Concord's own catalog number, and the date of the Concord's own survey, and the initials of the Concord's own surveyor. 40 years. 2,041 index cards, cut to the register's size, ruled to the register's ruling, written in the register's hand, because I had taught myself the registrar's script out of respect, and, I admit, out of something less respectable than respect. 900 kilograms of card in 11 drawers in a hand trolley pushed by a 26-year-old clerk from Antwerp who had been told nothing except to keep his hands on the rail. The audit question hung in the air of the hall. Commissioner Drawn sat down. His mantle was flat. Envoy Marta Ilv stood up. She did not go to the table of declaration. She stood where she was, in front of her chair, a small woman in a plain gray coat with her hands at her sides, and she waited the 3 seconds that the hall's procedure requires, and then she answered the question that had been put to her. 2,041. Nothing happened. I've replayed it a great many times, and I understand now that nothing happened because nothing could have happened yet. 806 delegations heard a number that had no meaning attached to it. A number is not an argument. Half the hall had not been listening to the question. The reading of the instrument had gone on for 2 hours and 40 minutes, and the audit was the fourth item of a long docket, and the human seat was a matter of no importance to anybody in that room. Commissioner Drawn's mantle lifted by perhaps a centimeter. In an Oreskai, this is the beginning of a laugh, not cruelty. It is genuinely the same gesture. Amusement and alarm share a hinge in that body, and the difference is only in what follows, and I have come to think that this is the single most important fact about them, and that we understood it far too late to be gracious about it. He said, through that expensive collar, that the delegation of Earth would find that the Commission's patience for theater was not what it had been. Envoy Ilv said nothing. She remained standing. Her hands stayed at her sides. And then from the small desk at the foot of the bench, without rising, in the flat tone of an officer of the hall doing an unremarkable thing, the tallier of the register said, "Chairholder, the declaration has been made under the audit. It must be entered." I want to say that Hesk was helping us. She was not. I have read what she wrote afterward, and she despised the human delegation, and she despised Drawn, and she despised the whole proceeding as a vulgar use of her hall. She said what she said because a declaration made on the floor under a lawful audit must be entered in the register within the sitting, and she was the tallier, and it was the 91st year of her office, and she had never once in 91 years failed to enter a thing that had to be entered. Chairholder Ossing looked down the bench at Drawn for a long moment. Then she turned her 4 black eyes on Envoy Ilves, and she said the sentence that has been on 100 million thumbnails since, and that I heard with my own ears, and that was not spoken with anger or menace or any drama whatsoever, but with the mild, careful, faintly embarrassed patience of an old woman asking a stranger to repeat a street name. "Say the number again, slowly." Envoy Ilv said 2041. And then she sat down. That is the whole of what she did. I have watched men build careers on describing what Marta Ilv said to the conquered of Talves, and the truth is that she spoke 8 words in the hall of the register on the first day and 11 on the second, and she never raised her voice, and she never once explained herself, and when she sat down she folded her hands and looked at the middle distance like a woman waiting for a train. Led pushed the trolley to the table of declaration. The table is oak, or the Talvesane equivalent of oak, 40 feet long, and it is where declarations are laid so that the registrars may take them up. Led set the brake. He opened the first drawer of the trolley. He lifted out a block of cards 400 deep, and he laid them on the table, squared them with the edge of his hand, and went back for the second. The hall watched a young man in a cheap suit stack paper for 11 minutes. I do not think it is possible to convey how much worse this was than a fleet. A fleet is a thing they had language for. Every species in that hall had a word for a ship arriving in a sky where it should not be, and a procedure for it, and a committee. There is no procedure for cards. When he was done, Envoy Ilves rose again and said the second half of a sentence she had never begun, which was the last thing said by any human being on the floor that day. The commission may compare. Then she sat down again, and the registrars came down the ladders. I said the hall's silence sounded like a drawer closing. That afternoon it sounded like a drawer opening. Tallier Hesk took the first card off the top of Led's stack. She read it. She looked at the 4th column. She did not react. She turned to the tier behind her and she said a number aloud, a Concord catalog number, 9 digits in the old numbering, and a registrar 3 tiers up went along the rail on his ladder and pulled a drawer and took out a card and brought it down and put it in her hand. She laid the 2 cards side by side on her desk. Same body, same coordinates, same star. 1 card in my handwriting in her register's script, saying that 411,000 human beings lived there and had lived there for 96 years, and that the world's human name was Marrow. One card in the handwriting of a surveyor 600 years dead, giving the ultraviolet flux at the surface, and the mean temperature, and the tectonic index, and the little black glyph in the corner. Of no account. Hesk sat with her hands flat on either side of the two cards, for what my record says was 51 seconds. Then she said, without looking up, "Chairholder, this will take some hours." It took 19. They recessed at dusk and they did not go home. Nobody went home. The galleries emptied and refilled and emptied again, as delegations went out to eat and came back to watch, because word had gone out into the city and up to the ships and back down again. And by the 3rd hour of the night, the hall of the register held more bodies than it had held at any sitting in 100 years, and every one of them was watching a woman in a tally cord, and 40 registrars on brass ladders checked 2,000, and 41 numbers against 411,000 drawers. We stayed at our places. It did not occur to us to leave. Seifa Oyelaren slept for 2 hours in his chair with his chin on his chest. Tomas Led stood at parade rest by an empty trolley and would not sit down when I told him to. Envoy Ilves read a book, and I have never asked her what it was. I watched the ladders. I had made every one of those cards, and I found that I could tell from the shape of a registrar's shoulders coming down the rail whether the drawer had held what my card said it would hold, and it always had. And after the first 200, the registrars stopped bracing themselves and simply went and pulled and came back. And after the first 1,000, a young one began to weep in the way the Ereskai weep, which is a lowering of the mantle so complete that the plates lie down against the spine, and which is also, in their language of shoulders, the deepest available form of ascent. At some point in the small hours, Commissioner Drawn left the bench and walked the length of the table of declaration, from the first stack to the last, slowly, with his hands behind him. He looked at the cards. He did not touch them. He had wanted, for 12 years, to compare the human declaration against the register. Twice he stopped and lifted a card and put it back. He was not being theatrical. I understood, watching him, that he was doing the same thing I had done on that hill on Marrow when I was 21 and had a Concord tag in my fist. He was looking at a number on a piece of paper and following it in his mind to the drawer it came from, and finding, each time, that it was already there, that it had been there before his grandmother's grandmother, that the Concord had gone to every one of these places first and looked at them and written the truth about them and shut the drawer. At the 11th hour, a V-Hem delegate rose in the gallery, one of the scholars, 4 arms, 3 of them holding paper, and asked leave to put a question to the assessor of instruments. It was granted. He asked it in the flat lawyer's talvis that the V-Hem speak better than the Ereskai do. If he said, the bodies declared by the delegation of Earth are already in the register, entered as unfit and of no account, then under Article 12 the register is conclusive as to what they are. And what they are is nothing. Therefore the human declaration declares nothing, and the audit has found nothing, and the human seat stands or falls on the 9 registered worlds as before, and the commission may go to bed. There was a movement in the hall. Mantles came down all along the tiers. It is a good argument. It is, I think, still the best argument anyone made in that room in 2 days, and it was made at 3 in the morning by a scholar who had not slept and who was trying, in good faith, to save 900 years of law with a single clean cut. The assessor of instruments was an Osside, very old, gray as a wall. He stood and folded and unfolded. He said, the register is conclusive as to what a body is. The register is not conclusive as to who stands on it. He said, Article 9 provides that an unfit body shall pass to no one, being nothing. It does not provide that no one shall go there. It could not. It never occurred to the drafters that anyone would. He said, the delegation of Earth has not claimed one of these bodies. It has not petitioned for one to be registered. It has not asked this commission for anything at all. It was asked what it holds, and it has answered, and the answer is verified against our own hand. And then he said the thing that ended the concord, and he said it as an old lawyer says a thing he has just discovered and would give a great deal to undiscover. He said, "The difficulty, Commissioner, is that 806 member states measure their frontiers as a distance from registered space. The register says these 2,041 bodies are nothing. If they are nothing, then the space between our worlds is empty, and our frontiers are where we have always said they are, and the human species is standing in a great deal of emptiness that no border of ours has ever needed to notice. And if we correct the register, if we strike the glyph and enter these bodies as inhabited, as they demonstrably are, and as our own instrument obliges us to when we learn of it, then every frontier in the conquered is measured from the wrong place. Every treaty of transit, every tithe, every seat, every census, every boundary ratified by this commission or any of the 8 before it, is measured from a register that was wrong, and every one of them opens." The hall did not erupt. I want that understood, too. Nobody shouted. The Concord of Talvis had governed a quarter of a spiral arm for 900 years, and it did not shout. What happened was that 806 delegations, all at once, in the flat white light of a room full of brass drawers, lifted their shoulders. The plates clicked. It went down the tiers in a wave and came back, and it went on for a long time, and it is the only sound I have ever heard that made the hair stand up on my arms, and I did not sleep properly for a year. The second sitting opened at noon, and it lasted 40 minutes. Chairholder Ossing had not slept, and it showed in nothing but the way she held the instrument, which was with both hands, like something that had become heavier overnight. Commissioner Drawn moved that the 2,041 declared bodies be struck from the Human Declaration as void, on the grounds that Article 9 forbids an unfit body to pass to any party, and that the human occupation of them was therefore a nullity in law and had never occurred. Talia Hesk stood at her small desk. She had been on her feet for 29 hours, and she was 94, and she spoke for perhaps 90 seconds. It was the longest speech I heard from an officer of the hall in 11 years of service, and every word of it was procedure. She said that the register may be amended only by evidence of survey. She said that the human cards were evidence of survey, in the proper form, verified against the Concord's own catalog by the Concord's own registrars, in the presence of the Commission, and that she had put her hand on every one. She said that Article 12 makes the register conclusive, and that conclusiveness runs both ways. What is in the drawer is true, and when the drawer is shown to be wrong, the register is wrong, and the tallier's oath obliges her to correct it within the sitting. She said that a motion to strike the cards was a motion to order the tallier of the register to enter a falsehood. And she said, "I will not do it, not for this commission, not for the last one, discipline me if you like, I am 94. Drawn's mantle was fully lifted, not amusement, not any longer. He turned and he asked the human delegation, across the floor in a voice the collar made thin, what it was that humanity wanted. Whether it wanted the seats, whether it wanted the census, whether it had come here to break the register or to be paid for not breaking it, and what the price was, and whether we had thought, at any point in 141 years of our smiling silence, about what we were doing. That was the moment. That is the moment where, in every retelling, a human being stands up and explains us, where the envoy squares her shoulders and gives the speech, and the hall goes still, and something is said about the human spirit that 100 million people can put on a poster. Marta Ilves stood up. She had 11 words left and she used them. "We have not moved anything," she said. "It is all where you left it." And she sat down. Drawn did not answer her. There was, I think, nothing available to answer. He had asked us for the price of our silence, and we had told him there had been no silence. And it was true, and every card on that table said so in his own register's hand, and the survey that proved it had been made by his own people at his own expense in his own ships 400 years before there was a human being alive who could read a star chart. Shareholder Ossing put the motion to strike. It failed. 11 commissioners, 9 did not lower. She then put the motion to amend the register. It did not fail. It could not be put at all, because the assessor of instruments rose and stated, for the record, that a motion to amend on this scale must first be referred to the 806 member states for opinion as to the consequent adjustment of their frontiers, and that such reference must be made before the sitting rises, and that the sitting could not rise until the audit was disposed of, and the audit could not be disposed of until the declaration was entered. And the declaration could not be entered without the amendment. The Commission had built that, not us. Every clause of it had been drafted by careful people who wanted a body that could not act rashly and could not be adjourned to avoid a truth, and they had succeeded, and it held on them. Shareholder Ossing sat with the instrument in both hands and looked at it for a while. Then she ordered the hall closed, and the drawers sealed, and the sitting continued. The sitting has never ended. It is 19 years now. There is a commission in that hall today, and the doors are shut, and the honor squadron is still on station overhead because no order has been passed to stand it down, and the 806 member states are still returning their opinions as to the adjustment of their frontiers, and the last count I saw was 206 of them returned, and 11 withdrawn from the conquered entirely. We did not do that. I have said it in 19 years of hearings on 200 worlds, and I will say it here. Nothing was done to the conquered of Talvis. Nothing arrived. Nothing was taken. Nothing was threatened. Not one human ship changed its station in the whole of that week, and I have the shipping records, and I have offered them to anyone who asked, and after the second year nobody asked. What happened is that a great body asked a small one. At last, the question it had never thought to ask, and got an honest answer, and could not survive it, because the answer had been sitting in its own drawers, in its own handwriting, for 600 years, waiting for somebody to open 2 of them at the same time. We left the hall at 1 in the afternoon, 4 of us and an empty trolley, and it was raining on Talvisane for the first time in 9 days, and Tomas Led, who was 26, asked envoy Ilves whether we had won. She said she did not know what that word would mean here. I did not sleep on the liner. I sat up in the observation gallery and watched the honor squadron fall behind, 11 beads on a wire, and I thought about the last thing I saw before we left. The floor of the hall was being cleared. 2,041 cards had to come off the table of declaration, and 40 registrars stood ready to carry them, and the ladders were manned on all 9 tiers. Tallier Hess came down from her desk with her tally cord swinging, and she stopped at the head of the table and she took up the top card in both hands. It was Marrow. It was the first card I ever wrote, 40 years old, my worst script, the ink gone brown. She read it. She read the catalog number in the 4th column. She said it aloud, and a registrar on the 6th tier went along the rail and pulled the drawer and brought down the old card, and she laid them together. And then she did the thing that her office required of her, which was not a gesture and not a protest and not a message to anyone, and which took the conquered of Talvis apart more completely than any fleet in the history of that spiral arm could have done. She struck the glyph. She wrote in the corner of a 600-year-old card, in the registrar's script that I had taught myself out of respect, inhabited, population 411,000, verified. And she carried it up the ladder herself, at 94 years of age, and she opened the drawer, and she filed it where it belonged. She was not our friend. She never spoke to us. She would not take envoy Ilves's hand at the door, and she wrote of us afterward in her private record that we were a species of clerks with the manners of a cold wind, which I have framed. She was a registrar. She had sworn an oath about what goes in a drawer, 91 years before, and she kept it in the 1 hour of her life when keeping it cost everything she had ever served. That is what undid them. Not our ships, which stayed where they were. Not our numbers, which we had told them every 10 years for a century and a half. Not any cleverness of ours. There was none. There was a surveyor with 2 pencils and a lifetime of cross-references, and a boy from Antwerp with his hands on a trolley rail. What undid them was that the conquered of Talvis had built a machine for telling the truth, and had run it faithfully for 900 years, and had never once imagined that the truth would come back through it in a direction they had not foreseen. They did not fall that afternoon. Nothing fell. The cruisers held formation, and the rain came down, and the drawers went on opening and closing, and they are opening and closing still. The conquered only stopped, that afternoon, being able to say where it was.